in 44, and next Saturday, partly sunny with a high of 43.
We're local and live at 99.5. Welcome to Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno.
What do we mean by alien? Does it always mean someone from another planet? Have we been visited by time travelers?
Hello, and welcome to the 986th edition of Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno, coming to you from WOON AM and FM radio in Woonsocket, Rhode Island, on the Paranormal Radio app, from TalkStream Live, on YouTube, and via TuneIn.com. I'm Ben, and that was Paul. And today we bring you one of our favorite guests on a subject that isn't as clear-cut as it seems. And to join in, you can give us a call, 401-766-1240. That's from anywhere. Or you can email Paul at behindtheparanormal.com.
You've seen him on the History Channel's Ancient Aliens, The Real 4400, The Abduction Diaries, and many more shows. And we're honored to have him back with us today. A native of Baltimore, Maryland, Reverend Michael J.S. Carter worked for many years as an actor in New York City before deciding to enter the ministry. He earned his Master of Divinity degree from Union Theological Seminary in New York City in 2000. He has been a hospital chaplain, has served Unitarian Universalist congregations, and most recently moved to North Carolina to continue his ministry there. Michael is a longtime UFO contactee and the author of 4 books that I know of, including the Amazon bestseller Alien Scriptures, Extraterrestrials in the Holy Bible.
So, Reverend Michael Carter, welcome back to Behind the Paranormal.
Always a pleasure. Always a pleasure. I'm off today. Usually I'm in service. I'm at service now, but I got a Sunday off. So this is my church service this morning.
Okay.
Well, thanks for spending your Sunday with us.
Yes.
So I guess we'll hop right into it. Depending on the case, there have been suggestions that what we call aliens can be called people from other planets, extraterrestrials, time travelers being from parallel worlds or other dimensions, or ultra-terrestrials, if you will, biomechanical entities, demons, or something outside our current understanding. So what say you?
Well, I say it may be a little bit of all of the above. I'm not sure about the demon part, but there are beings that we know need hardware to travel to and fro. We're calling them ships, UAPs, UFOs. There are some beings who can just show up. And sometimes they take an anthropomorphic form. Sometimes they're just pure energy. I think it's very, very hard to categorize. As far as most of the beings, if not all that I have seen, were physical beings that they showed up in my room a couple times. They touched me. They were physical beings. I'm assuming they had a ship somewhere outside or up in the atmosphere. But there's stories about beings who they're just pure energy beings. So and they may not even be extraterrestrials. With the high strangeness of this is one that we just have to. For me, it raises more questions than answers, and that we have to just be open to all of these forms of these life forms and reality. Regarding the time traveler hypothesis. I remember I was telling your dad a book. I didn't read all of it, but I think it was from Tennessee or Greenleaf Publications in Tennessee, called by Mark Davenport, with Mark with a C. And the book was Time Travelers from the Future or something like that, Extraterrestrials. You can look it up on Amazon. And his hypothesis was that these beings were from our future because, of course, he used quantum physics, which I'm not a physicist, Einstein's theories on time. And he said if these beings can bend space and time, then that means they can travel through time. And then you got some people say, well, there's no such thing as time. You can see where this would go back and forth. But there is some, lastly, there is some, I could not find any definitive proof that these extraterrestrials were time travelers. But there is a story of, and a lot of a lot of what's in Dr. Goldberg's book is from hypnotic regression. I don't want to say it's gospel truth because there are many influences, but many of the people that he's regressed have said they've been taken aboard ships and told these things. There was a story, and maybe you've heard it, Paul, where an individual said that a star person had a crystal. It may have been in one of Linda Morton Howe's books or what have you. And the crystal showed events from Earth history. One of the things that was this individual said, and it may have been a government intelligence officer, that they were shown the crucifixion of Jesus.
Yeah.
So if they could show us that, other events too, biblical events, archaeological, scientific events, were all on this crystal, that kind of technology would lend itself, I think, to, if you can show me the crucifixion of Jesus, then most likely you may have witnessed it.
Yeah.
But that's as much as I could get, without giving out some disinformation or just being flat out wrong.
Well, one of the things that's come to our attention, actually came to our attention some years ago, when we were doing the Rendlesham, that's 11
Forest.
years ago now, I think,
Yes.
the Rendlesham Forest sum up, and we did more on that case than any other show up to that time. We had all major witnesses on, etc. Well, John Burroughs and Jim Penniston, two of the major guys in that case from 1980, Air Force security people witnessing all these UFO landings, etc. Most people know about that. Jim was in a position where he actually touched one of these objects on the ground, saw this weird script on it, couldn't recognize it, wrote it down. But he said later on in under hypnosis that they were not aliens, they were us. So several people who were there postulated that these were time travelers, not people
Yes.
from another planet. Because it could be both, as you say, might be all of the above, but we really don't know. Why don't we? Everybody who wrote in is interested in the time travel hypothesis. So let me turn a question here over to. What did I do with it? Here it is. A question from Peter Shelley in Bogota, Colombia. Our good friend and one of our occasional co-hosts, and a really great questioner.
Indeed, and Peter writes to us, please ask Reverend Carter, what are some specific credible cases that strongly suggest time travelers, and why?
Yes, that's the gentleman. I could not find any. I could not find any, again, that I could say were credible. There's, like I said, there's some books, Dr. Goldberg, there's another book more recent than that, and it's a hypothesis, it's a theory, but there's nothing definitive, except for what we've got, people in regression. And again, I don't want to discount that, but I can't say that's gospel truth. And so I could not find any. All I could find were some books where people were pursuing this line of thinking.
Well, there were some interesting internet phenomena regarding alleged time travelers, and Michael, you and I were talking about this on Friday.
Yeah, and I didn't want to come with that,
Yeah, well, just to mention, there are amazing numbers of people who take what they see on the internet as gospel.
Yes.
There's one guy, and I love this guy. He claims that he has a time travel device. Excuse my voice, gee. And that he has gone back to prehistoric times, and he's floating above this, Jurassic landscape or whatever, and he's describing all kinds of dinosaur species whom we know did not live at the same time. I mean, I love this guy,
Also, I believe the Earth's atmosphere was toxic. At
It
that
was, yeah. He
point.
went. Well, he was in some kind of bubble, but yeah, well, we mentioned that too. You couldn't have breathed the air at the time, so good luck.
Yeah.
But in any case, I think we have to define what is time travel. I know a physicist who was working on that, and he says you don't travel back and forth in time, you travel sideways. Because I guess our next question maybe gets into that a little bit, and this is from Phil in Savannah, Georgia. Ben, if you would do the honors here.
Sure. Okie dokie. And Phil writes to us a couple of questions, and we'll start with the very first one, because that is a great place to start. If some of the aliens...
Mary Poppins.
Yeah. Yes, the Mary Poppins of the paranormal. If some of the aliens, quote unquote, are actually time travelers, could they be our species from the distant future?
Well, we kind of...
Yeah, we kind of went over that. Again, and I don't want to disappoint, but I have no definitive, I mean, this is all speculation. So, as I found out in this with this phenomenon, that anything is possible. But there's
right.
I don't want to rule out anything, but there's no definitive story, narrative, experience where we say, yes, these beings are us from the future.
Well, it might be, in a way, kind of run under our noses. Now, Phil gets into this, I think, in his second or third question, but what do you mean by time? I mean, it's apparently is simultaneous, if you believe Einstein and some of the quantum physicists.
Yes.
There is no past, there is no future. And so it's a function of our consciousness. And we ourselves are traveling in time in that sense all the time, so to speak. If the simultaneity is as literal as they say it is, we're involved in still the happiest moments of our lives. I'm still having my first hamburger, and heaven only knows when that one, or whatever, things that were pleasant or things that were unpleasant are still going on as part of this consciousness of ours. And we're living many lives in parallel universes. Again, if that theory is correct. Ben, what does...
So
Phil goes on to ask another question or two.
He does. And this we already sort of talked about, but we might as well throw it out there and we can maybe go into more depth, which is, what is their agenda?
Assuming they're time travelers, what would be their
Correct.
agenda? Well, I don't know. What I've heard is that their DNA is failing and they're coming back to get ours, but that would imply a different physics. Michael?
Which is possible. We just want to be clear about they, because there's so many different races.
That's exactly the point.
That answer, what do they want? Who knows? There's so many different people. And let me tell you, if I knew that answer, if we knew it, we could split the Nobel Prize money.
Right.
What is their agenda? I think different races probably have different agendas. Some races may have a prime directive, where we just observe.
Yeah.
Some may say, if this gets out of hand with the nuclear stuff or with what they're doing to the planet, maybe we'll step in. I mean, you hear all these things, but there's nothing definitive. And so, again, as frustrating as it may be, believe me, I'm frustrated too that I can't answer those questions definitively for you.
Well, nobody
but
can.
We're still in the dark around what these different races want. We do know, obviously, that they're highly technological. We're trying to figure out some of the things they do with 21st century science. And these people can be thousands, maybe millions of years ahead of us technology.
Well, that brings up a question. Would they consider us as equals? Stan Friedman used to say that these aliens would be looking at us as a primitive species whose primary activity is tribal warfare. And he'd say, why would they want to talk to us? So, I think that makes sense to you.
I think it may make sense for some of it. I mean, coming ever from a theological standpoint, some of these beings may have created us, and so it's always good to check in on your handiwork.
You're right.
There are, even though Fox News won't tell us or MSNBC, and I'm not picking a political side. I'm saying we're always being misled. We're always only getting some of what's going on. Right? I think we can agree on that.
Yeah.
And so that's my point by bringing that up. And so people asking these questions, we don't know. But we do know that some of them are deeply spiritual, and probably, again, thousands of years ahead of us, probably on the spiritual aspect of things as well. But I don't know if they would say all of us are primitive, because there's some deeply spiritual people on the planet. And some of them have been visited by these beings and some haven't. So I don't think they would write us off. But I think generally speaking, we're being observed. There has been some contacts, experiences, call them what you will. And usually the message is not for all, but the message is we need to change the way we do things. We need to change the way we are with each other. We need to change the way we interact with this planet. Usually those are the messages.
Yeah.
Some type of spiritual growth is needed.
Yeah.
Now, and then there are those who are feeling violated. They have sperm taken, ovum taken, just treated rather roughly, and dumped back wherever they were picked up from. So these experiences run the gamut.
Yeah. One of the things we often point out is that when we use the term advanced, we often mean that they are advanced technologically. But that, I think, is a serious mistake, as we're always saying, who was the most technologically advanced country in the 1930s? Nazi Germany. How'd that go? And so I think I'd rather be dealing with a species that is spiritually and morally advanced than technologically advanced. So, Ben?
Well, that brings up a really interesting point. I was my dad and I had a conversation last week, and there's actually someone out there. Her name's Dr. Paula Boddington, and she does a lot of research on the ethics of artificial intelligence, and it's really interesting stuff. And I heard an interview with her a while ago, and she brought up some really interesting points, because now AI is like the big buzzword nowadays, and it's fascinating because she's like, well, it's interesting because, the first question is, how do we know it's conscious? And then she fires back with, well, we don't even know if we're conscious. How do we know if an artificial intelligence is conscious? And she basically says, well, no, because it operates within parameters that we set. And so whoever is setting the parameters, and it operates within those, that's kind of how you determine whether it's moral or not. If the person creating it is moral, then it will be moral. But then you need to figure out, well, how can an artificial intelligence determine morality? And it can't, only because it's built within a certain set of parameters. And so it comes down to the people who create it. And so it's the same with technology, right? And there's this whole theme in like early civilization where the gods come down, they give us technology, and then we goof around and mess it all up, and then the gods have to come back and fix it. And it's this whole Deus ex machina that keeps happening over and over and over and over again. And we've never really left the Tower of Babel, so to speak. We're still trying to do the same things. Arguably, AI is now the newest Tower of Babel, because essentially the whole goal of humans having technology in the first place is to control the world around us. That's really, it's our whole thing, There's really only two things that an entity such as a human wants: to expand oneself and to protect oneself. And so by expanding ourselves, we try to use technology to expand into the world around us, but it requires great sacrifice. We have to sacrifice our memories, our by that I mean, like, why bother remembering things when I could just look it up on my phone? Or, we have to sacrifice our social lives in order to be parasocial, in a sense, to have sort of these parasitic social lives where we live through other people, and we negate all real life connections so that we can have these fake sort of idealized connections through other people. And so the whole point of this essentially is that this whole theme of technological advancement, I mean, personally, in my generation, I look around and, there was a recent statistic that came out that suicide rates are just going up further and further, every year, and it's sad because it's like, it doesn't have to be that way. And especially, the whole COVID thing kind of really shined a light on a very sensitive subject, which is the increasing isolation that we all have. Even as, like, it's nice that my dad and I get to be in studio and do this, and we don't have to be, apart, different parts of the world. And it's nice, there's something different about having a face-to-face interaction. But at the same time, it's like, this increasing convenience is sort of a sacrifice, of isolation, And I think really the whole thing, when I think of, oh, they're so advanced, then we think that means, oh, it's great, they're doing great. And it's like, I don't know, I see advancement on our end. Maybe it's because humans aren't ready for it, and we're trying, and we're like, this is a great idea, because we're ultimately very idealistic and irrational creatures, that perhaps it is that, oh, this is great, everyone can connect, and then it's like, it's not real connection, and we increasingly abstract ourselves from the quote-unquote real world. And I think that the really the biggest sort of stumbling block when it comes to, well, they're so advanced, it's like, I don't know, man. It's like, I look around and, like, we're getting more advanced by the day, and it honestly, I'm not a Luddite or anything, but it does kind of freak me out a little bit for the future.
Well, you said a lot of stuff. For me, AI, we're going there anyway. Whether, no matter who, if you think it's good for the planet or bad for the planet, we're going to a Star Trek world. The only difference, technologically speaking, when we're talking about advancement of star people, at least I think of it as what they've done is at least the ones that I visited, the after effects of my visits with them, is that they have found a way to merge their spirituality and their technological prowess. That's something that we have not been able to do as yet on this planet. With the technology that we get, we make weapons. And so that's the crudest way to put it, but that's what we do. And I think, too, that we don't want to fall into the trap of thinking that my human incarnation, that they would think like me. Maybe
Right.
they don't experience that isolation. That's the thing. Sometimes we go, well, I think like this. Well, we do that with each other. I think like this, so shouldn't that person over there think like that? That may not be it at all.
Yeah.
And we need to always remember that. And then one last thing, and let me, because I know, Paul, you were going to jump in. To me, AI, it's the technology, it's like money to me, in the sense of money is not good or bad, it's our intent with it. And the same thing with most of the people I know who are leery of AI, they're not really leery of AI per se. They're leery of it being used in ways that will keep us divided.
Yeah.
No, that's accurate.
And yeah. Because you can use the technology for good, but we just don't.
Yeah.
Isn't that the story of
Well,
humanity?
on that
we just
cheerful
don't.
note, why don't we take our mid-show break? You're listening to Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno on WOON 1240 AM, 99.5 FM in New England's very nice Blackstone River Valley. And we'll be right back with our great guest, Reverend Michael J.S. Carter, so stick with us.
ON Radio. ON Hi, this is Joe Callahan, your maitre d' inside the Tiki Bar, heard Monday nights at 6 on ON Radio. It's 1 full hour of Jimmy Buffett music. The Tiki Bar is brought to you by Attorney Bob Lauder, the Carew Investment Group, Pep and Lumber, and Family Discount Furniture.
ON Radio, ON Worldwide. You can depend on us for public service. ON Radio.
Well, here we are back behind the paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno on WOON AM and FM radio. And we're with our great guest and our good friend, Michael Carter, Reverend Michael J.S. Carter from North Carolina, whom you have seen on Ancient Aliens and many other places in the media, author, lecturer, researcher, and
All-around Renaissance man.
I think so, yes.
Why, thank you.
So, Ben, you have you wanted to continue the AI, so did I, but...
Well, it's sort of, kind of. I have sort of a point that kind of encompasses this. I don't know if it's a point, but it's an observation, I suppose. There's sort of this way that humans organize civilization that we've always kind of done, right? Even from the first cities to, like, now, right? Where we kind of have this society of concentric circles, and the further you get away from the center, sort of the more it deviates from the center. And sort of on the outskirts of civilization, there's always the monstrous, the unknown, chaos, really. And we're always trying to figure it out. And we never quite can. And it always comes across differently to different people. And I always find it fascinating because I always try to bring up to people who are like, oh, well, that's why I appreciate your point of view so much. That it's like, well, they're extraterrestrials or whatever kind of beings they are that are, benign, or, they're benevolent, or they're malignant, and they're all over the place. But I always kind of bring this up with people who are kind of one way or another. They're like, oh, they're all good, they're all bad, and there's sort of this idea that everything on the outside of sort of our structured, quote unquote structured, civilization that we've sort of created. There's this monstrous thing on the outside of it, that we can't quite define, but we try our best to, whether we try to use science to explain it or we use spirituality to explain it. Because, if you look back at, like, some ancient translations of the Bible, they had unicorns in there, centaurs, and all sorts of stuff like that.
Yeah.
And they did their best to kind of explain what they couldn't explain because it was all on the outside, right? It's like... I heard this really interesting discussion a long time ago that when like the first sort of people went out into the desert to sort of get away from civilization, this very, very famous theologian, Metropolitan Kallistos Ware, a blessed memory, he made a really interesting. He was I called him Bishop Gandalf personally because he kind of sounded like Gandalf. He looked like Gandalf, huge beard,
Yeah, he did.
and he would have these very, very dry sense of humor, and he would have this very, very learned British accent because he went to, like, Oxford and he was there with, like, Tolkien and all these guys, and he gave a really fascinating lecture on the Desert Fathers, and it was super interesting because he was like, well, when I was getting my doctorate, and I made a thesis, and I had went on and on about the beauty of the desert and silence and solitude, and when I presented it to my professor, she said, that's all very good, but you're wrong. And essentially she was like, they didn't go into the desert because it was quiet, they went in there because that's where the demons were. And so that was a really interesting point because it's this idea that something on the outside of civilization far away is where the monstrous exists and where these unknown entities exist, and we try our best to define it. And it's almost like, when you go further into the sticks, if you will, it gets kind of more and more freaky outside. You hear all these sort of modern urban myths, basically, of skinwalkers wandering around the Appalachians, and like, oh, you don't go outside at night in the Appalachian Mountains or whatever because there's skinwalkers out there. And it's like, it's funny because people are like talking about skinwalkers nowadays, and I'm just like, oh, okay, well, we've known what these were for years, but now they're in the normal lexicon because mythology still stays within civilization, even if it's just characterized in the paranormal nowadays. So that being said, we do our best to define these things. But really, at the end of the day, it's kind of this same thing where chaos kind of exists on the outside. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I think that we we've always otherized. That's beyond that's the unknown, and since I'm afraid of it, I have to label it. We do that with people, places, things. It's what we do. I'm not saying that we should continue this as a species, but if we don't understand it, we fear it, and we'll give it a name. I mean, that's why we hit the alien. Alien, that's not the greatest name, but we don't understand you. You are so other than us, or we like to think so, and you come from the great beyond. And so it's very human to do the things that we do. Who was it? Wordsworth said we murder to dissect. We have to compartmentalize everything in life. I want to get back, though, to the technology. I'm going to look at the Grenada Treaty. My point of departure is going to be that I believe it's true that Eisenhower did meet. But if you look at the story, it's almost like a parable, really. He's away. He sneaks away. A tooth came out allegedly. He's eating some fried chicken. Eisenhower. He goes away to I forget which Air Force base, and he meets a group of Nordic people or tall white people, more humanoid, right? And they say to him, basically, what's up with this nuclear program? What are you doing? You need to walk this back. You don't know what you're doing. We need you to back off from this. Eisenhower, I wouldn't have wanted to have to make that decision. Eisenhower, according to the story, says, we can't do that. We don't live in a utopia. I'm paraphrasing. When you read, he also, like a week after that, 10 days after this meeting, the treaty, they do some nuclear testing. The Nordic folk say, we can teach you how to grow spiritually, but you need to stop your nuclear program. Eisenhower says no. Okay. Then a group of Greys, and I'm being meticulous here, not all Greys, a group of Greys approach Eisenhower and say, we will give you technology. We just want to take a few people, we'll give you their names, maybe some cattle, we will do some experiments. Eisenhower allegedly says, we can't stop you. And, this is, I'm talking about if you read Lieutenant Corso's book, if you research it, Michael Sala's book on this. And he says, I can't stop you. And then, so he signs this treaty. And he can't tell the American people, obviously, he's bypassed the Constitution, everything. And we're living that legacy now. The point I'm trying to make is, and just as a caveat, when Werner von Braun talks about how they were getting their technology, Hitler, and during World War II, the technology he got was from a different group of Nordic people. I say that for a couple reasons, because a lot of people look at the Nordic people and say, since they're so blonde, blue-eyed, and beautiful, they're more like us. They're more humanoid, but they had a renegade faction working with the Nazis. The point I'm trying to make with the technology in all this, it's almost biblical, or from the Upanishads or whatever, we all face that every day, guys. Do I cultivate the spiritual in me, or do I let technology take over? I mean, I just gave the example of macro because we're talking about governments, all right, and Eisenhower talking to these off-world intelligences. But what he had to face was what we all face, on the every man or woman level of how do I stay true to myself in a world that's technologically gone overboard or doesn't have the wisdom to use it? Do I just go with the flow of everything? because this is what technology can do? Or do I say, wait a minute, I need to center myself. I need to cultivate my inner life so I can deal with the technology. Does that make sense?
No,
Yes.
I follow you. I think that makes a lot of
the
sense.
technology is neutral. The technology is like money. It exists. It's our intentionality. And Eisenhower, I wouldn't have wanted to make that decision. He did what he thought was best. But if you start one lie, and here we are 70 years later, we're still doing. They had the Foo Fighters back then. We got F-16s. They were following this technology in World War II and before, crash disk, the story. But here we are now living that legacy, still being lied to by the government, and living in this highly technological age. People are afraid. We have our culture wars over race, over sexuality. We're still dealing with this stuff. But people, and then you throw in the technology, it's a recipe for disaster. So how do we cultivate our spirituality? Because I believe that's what this whole phenomenon is about. And you don't have to have people come from another dimension or another planet to make you spiritual. I'm not implying that. But what I am saying is that life is fast, life is crazy. We're going into a new age. Each of us has to decide what kind of person we want to be.
No, I hear that. That's
Amidst all this stuff.
Oh yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense, and I think of it like how sort of the ancients kind of viewed the world, that there were these kind of like layers that were happening all at the same time, and now I think with the dawn of the internet, that kind of adds another layer of things, because we almost exist. We all know that we exist in multiple different layers, right? So we have the physical world, spiritual world. It's all kind of happening all at the same time, and now we have this sort of odd way in which we kind of view and interact with each other through the internet, right? And it's like we sort of allow different portions of ourselves to be shown, but while we interact on this other sort of manufactured plane of existence. And that's definitely something I'm going to be considering for a while now. You just added a whole other dimension to this as well.
Well, I remember.
No, it really is, and where we're going is, we can go either way. But right now we seem to be. I'm talking collectively speaking. As we seem to be going where more money, more material, more money, more technology. And we don't really have the wisdom to deal with the technology.
No, there's a very high lack of discernment nowadays. It's a skill that's not very well prized. Does not get you jobs, but that's really interesting, because there's sort of this idea that there's these persistent symbols and themes throughout civilization, right? So like the idea of like sacred space, which is not really a super, well, I wouldn't say it's gone nowadays, but it's definitely changed a lot. But like, an example being like the Nile River, right? Or the Red Sea, even better. So like, you go back into Exodus, right? And we see, oh, well, he parted the Red Sea. But there was a really interesting comparison I heard that was basically like, okay, well, that's a mistranslation, and really it should read the Reed Sea, R-E-E-D, which was essentially the Egyptian version of the river Styx. And so the idea was that the Red Sea and the Reed Sea were the same thing, because it's, any place can become a spiritual place, if given the right circumstances. So it added a different dimension to Exodus, because essentially it was like, well, God's fighting the Egyptian gods while the Hebrews are fleeing Egypt. And so it adds this other layer of existence to it. And that was sort of a thing throughout a lot of different civilizations. Like caves always led to the underworld or whatever, which is why Odysseus goes to the mouth of a cave and he spreads a bunch of blood there to get the shades to come up, and so he can talk to Achilles. And it's the same sort of thing. But nowadays, we have this, the internet can take you anywhere at the same time, right? Even in, not even like in a metaphysical sense. It's like if I wanted to look up ancient Egypt on my phone, I could find a video and boom, there I am, But, it's sort of this odd idea of sacred space that's sort of brought to you in this sense. And so I think it's important to consider that, because we have these ideas that persist in these archetypes, as Carl Jung would call it, right? That persist in these symbols, but just because they're symbols doesn't mean they're not real and don't have impact. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it reminds me of the old saying that just because an event didn't happen doesn't mean it's not true.
Right. I wanted to suggest a film that Michael suggested to me a few months ago that I watched called The 11th Green.
Oh my God, yes.
Yes, really outstanding. And it's a little out there. You get President Obama sitting down with President Eisenhower, in a sort of a meditative state or something of that kind. And the sort of the wisdom and the insight of this into the alien ethos from our point of view is really very good. And I'm thinking too of, speaking of AI, Nigel Kerner, the late Nigel Kerner, believed that the Greys were biomechanical.
Yes. At least some
Essentially.
of them were, yeah.
Yeah, and we did a show on that a few weeks ago with two of his associates. And just another indication that we don't have the slightest idea what the heck is going on.
Exactly.
Yeah,
and,
so-
and the technology it would require to create these grays. And I'm not saying all, because some of them are very big, they're like robots. People would say, okay, let's see if they think like us. If we were going to go to another planet, or even the military, you send a probe, you send a patrol. You don't necessarily send a flesh and blood person, right?
Right.
Because you don't really know. So some of the grays, especially the smaller ones, may be artificial intelligence, but they're brilliant. I mean, the technology behind that is really, you're talking millions of years ahead of us.
Yeah. So before we burn up the hour here, Michael, tell us about where people can find out more, what you're working on. You're doing some more filming for Ancient Aliens, I understand.
Yeah, well, okay, thank you. Something that I shot back in, the early September. It's called, the show's called History's Greatest Mysteries.
Oh, cool.
It's on the History Channel with Lawrence Fishburne is the host. And it just aired Tuesday, and I usually don't watch these things. At the beginning I used to, back in 2014, 2015, the newness, I go, I get paid, and I come home.
Yeah, right.
But my wife said, well, I'm interested, and I want you to sit here with me. So I watched it. The segment is the 25th anniversary of the Phoenix Lights.
Oh, that's right. Oh, I meant to watch.
Yes.
I didn't know you were in that. That's a new
it
series,
just came
too.
on Tuesday.
Okay.
So that's what I just finished doing, and it's just starting to air. They did a really good job. Alejandro Rojas is in it.
Okay, yeah.
Lynn Kate, two other, a guy from MUFON, and I forget, there's another gentleman. Anyway, I was impressed with what they did. So, I think it's season 4, episode 5, but it's
Okay.
streaming now.
All the people who've been on the show. I don't watch stuff I'm in either. I don't like seeing
I just
myself.
don't,
If Ben's with me, I watch it.
Right. No, I just
whole
don't
family
watch
does.
it. But they do a great job. Even with Ancient Aliens. I don't watch it, but I know they do a great job, and people
They
always
do.
telling
Ben's
me they
mom
do a
likes
great
it. And remember, when it comes to TV, it's like,
She's very hard to please.
like that old commercial.
And they've done some
Mikey
good
will
stuff.
like it. He hates everything.
They've done, yeah. And I'm going back out to Michigan, to Lake Houghton, Michigan in September for their UFO conference, UFO Con. And that's about it. Just church has been keeping me busy. My daughter will be going off to college in about 18 months. I don't know where yet. She doesn't know where yet. So life has been full. And you can get my books and everything on Amazon or Barnes & Nobles.
Okay, excellent. Let's try to work in one more question. This is from
Sure.
Lauren in Connecticut.
Sure
If
thing.
you would.
I will. I will. And Lauren writes to us. I've recently listened to Greg Brandon on his YouTube channel, where he puts forth an interesting theory that instead of fighting global warming with encouraging people to lower their carbon footprint, and the regulations geared towards CO2 in the atmosphere, governments, the UN, etc., are actually in league with the alien races that have already they're already living among us, and the governments are helping in terraforming Earth so it can become a more hospitable environment for them, even though it isn't an actual ideal environment for us. I'd be interested to hear what Reverend Carter thinks of this, and you and Ben as well.
Well, that's different. Michael?
Yeah. Well, you go first, Ben. I'll just say this Paul, very quickly, I don't know where people get their information, so I don't know if that's true or not.
Kind of hope it is.
I'm just very vigilant about that now, because there's so much information and disinformation, and some of it has a kernel of truth in it. I'm not saying that's not true, but I'm saying I have no way of verifying that.
Yeah. Ben, you want to
sure.
throw that in your lap?
Here you go, kid. Well, there's an author I really like who discusses this. He was an old school 80s and 90s environmentalist, and was involved in a lot of really big climate protests and stuff in the 90s. And his name's Paul Kingsnorth, and he writes really, really interesting Substack on a lot of different things. And he has some really cool ideas that I really like. But he talks a lot about this idea of this thing called the machine that we've kind of built, the capital M machine, that's sort of a metaphysical thing that we've kind of created. That he was back in the 90s, he did an interview that I saw a while ago where he basically was it was really cool. We advocated for more agrarian societies and kind of stepping back, because really we saw that what the big thing was that was really hurting everything was industry and all of that, like oil companies and things like that. It's and then somewhere around the 2000s, everything switched up, and we're well, we need more wind farms, we need more solar panels, we need more of this and this and this. And he was the reason that happened was because a lot of companies started getting involved, and instead of actually helping, they decided, well, we're going to make money off of this. So we're going to basically market these things that seem like they're good for the environment, but they really aren't. And we're going to monetize environmentalism. And that was kind of the big thing. And he was well, he was really the problem is that I'm not sure. I think it's easier to point to some sort of it's aliens that are messing with the environment, not us. It's kind of washing the outside of the bowl and not the inside, as Christ would say, right? Where it's instead of looking at ourselves and seeing what we're doing wrong, it's it's aliens and stuff that are really messing everything up. And that's not really fair, because we've sort of written ourselves into a corner, because now our entire society is based off of fossil fuels. And then taking it away, it's it's kind of, I don't know. It's just there's a whole lot of backward stuff going on. Anyway, so the whole point of Paul Kingsnorth's argument is that it has a lot more to do with greed more than anything else, and I tend to agree with that only because it's I remember growing up watching a bunch of documentaries. They would sit us down in 6th grade and be you're ruining the planet. And they would throw on these documentaries that were we need to do more to fight pollution. And it's go and use these egg cartons and make them into planters. And it's I don't understand how that's helping, but okay.
Right.
And so but then it changed. Things really changed really in the last couple of decades. And it's even more evident nowadays, especially with BlackRock kind of going in and saying, well, we created this algorithm to make investors kind of, to rate your company so that you can, oh, should I invest in this company? Are they morally, are they moral? That was kind of the whole thing was they were yeah, let's make this whole system. I don't have all the story in front of me, but essentially, in 2016, BlackRock launched this whole program that they created. It was an artificial intelligence that would basically take a bunch of data points from your company and then basically give it a rating and say, okay, well, this is a really high rating because they do a lot to kind of help quote unquote society. And so that's why you kind of have this whole thing where companies are trying to get more socially active. it's just to make more money. It's not about actually helping people. It's about making more money. So I mean, I think it's probably safe to say that when it comes to aliens, messing with the environment, I don't know. I just don't really see that. I don't see why they would gain anything, or why they would even want to live here in the first place. It's like,
well, Lauren perhaps has a higher opinion of governments than I do. I find that most governments couldn't organize a game of solitaire. The U.S. government is so enormous that half it doesn't know what the other half is doing. When it comes to the whole UFO secrecy thing,
No,
some
if you-
agencies know things.
try to deal with the IRS, and that'll teach you all you need to know
Yeah,
about
right.
government
So-
efficacy.
So don't get us in trouble. So as far as the government's plotting with aliens, I just don't see that. Michael?
Yeah, like I said, when I hear stuff like that, and I mean no disrespect, I'm like, where are you getting that from? Because when you start making those kinds of claims, you got to come up with something.
Right,
Now,
right.
the part of the truth of that is probably that we are in touch with off-world intelligences. Our government and other governments are as well. And so that's why I say there's always a kernel of truth in these things.
Mm-hmm.
But then to say, and I agree with you guys, and it's it lets us off the hook. We're not
you're right.
responsible. It
Yeah.
lets and there are two ways with that. I know some people, and they may be right. They say that because of the nuclear threats, because of the movie Oppenheimer's coming out, we're going to be revisiting some of these things, these nuclear tests and stuff. It reverberates in other dimensions and on other planets, and so people will say that's why this group of people came to world leaders, Eisenhower specifically, and said, "What's up with this? You don't know what you're doing." That part is there as well. But I'm also very leery of people who say, and this is not what the question was about, so we're not going there. The aliens will come and save us. I don't like that word, but they're going to come and save us.
Yeah.
And again, it's this child's mentality that you come clean up our mess. I hear people say that whether you believe in God or not. But they say, well, why is God allowing this to happen, this shenanigans? But meanwhile, it's human beings who are causing it.
That's right.
We want Big Daddy or Big Mommy, or we want somebody to come in and save us. But we made this mess.
Yeah,
And it would be lovely at the 11th hour the cavalry comes in and these ships save us from ourselves. But I wouldn't count on that. We made a mess of things, and in order to mature, we need to face up to that and start making the corrections that we need, and stop blaming it on saviors and extraterrestrials and other people instead of looking at ourselves.
A very wise and salient point to end the show on. Michael, we're out of time, but stick around and we'll do our announcements and take it away, Ben.
Sure thing. Well, we got some stuff cooking in the old fridge there, and you can look for us at the New England Parafest. That's in Kittery, Maine, on April 22nd and 23rd. And we will debut a new presentation on mimics.
We'll be at the Para Expo 2023 aboard the USS Salem at Quincy, Massachusetts, May 19th, 21st. We'll be speakers and we'll broadcast live from the ship on our Sunday, May 21st show. At this event, we will debut a new presentation, When We Die. I should qualify that bit.
Yes, it's bound to be.
We won't be dead when we present it, I hope.
It would be like a Weekend at Bernie's scenario. So you can visit our show website, that's behindtheparanormal.com, and where you can find nearly 1,200 hours of our regular shows and special broadcasts since 2008 from CBS Radio, Achieve Radio, and here on WOON, AM and FM. And also you can hear many of these broadcasts on major podcast platforms, including iTunes, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube.
And we even have a show app. It's free at behindtheparanormal.com right there on the main page. You can browse our books along with those of our guest co-hosts at our show website. Again, that is behindtheparanormal.com. Also visit our charity page with links to several good causes we've adopted. including Hope for Hilldale Cemetery, Haverhill, Massachusetts, USA Cares, Canadian Veterans Advocacy, Helping Haiti's Orphans, which is my favorite. And we know the people who run these, so we can vouch for them. So what's going on next week, Ben?
So next week, that is March 12th, we will welcome back the legendary Whitley Strieber for a look at one of the weirdest experiences on record, the Master of the Key.
Sounds like Ghostbusters.
Yeah, I know. That's it. Are you the key?
Man.
Are you the Key Master?
Apparently he is. Well, I leave you today with a quote from everyone's favorite 13th century philosopher and theologian, Rumi. It sums up the philosophy of life that we like. Knock and he'll open the door, vanish and he'll make you shine like the sun, fall and he will raise you to the heavens, become nothing and he'll turn you into everything. I'm Paul Eno.
And I'm Ben Eno, and thanks for joining us on our great cosmic journey, and we shall see you next time on Behind the Paranormal.
Return to this radio frequency 167 hours from now for another edition of Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno.
Broadcasting live and local daily from the Navigant Credit Union